In mid-June earlier this year, I had an opportunity to tour three main cities of Australia, Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney. The invitation was from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Government of Australia. And the purpose of this trip was to understand and find out what the Australian Defence Ministry as well as the Foreign Ministry is doing in terms of strategic interests that Australia pursues and how defence acquisition and defence industrial capability is being enhanced and strengthened as far as Australia is concerned. I found an uncanny similarity between what Australia has been doing since 2016 and what India has done since 2016 in terms of strengthening the defence industrial base in their own countries. Two, the Australian focus is also on trying to sustain the small and medium industries and give them an assured business over a long period of time. And three, Australia has come to realize that for years it was importing or buying equipment off the shelf mainly from the US and other allies. But the decision to go local and decision to have more strategic autonomy is almost similar to what India is trying to do from 2016. So the tour began from Sydney, where the Australian Navy has its biggest base in Garden Islands. There I was briefed by senior naval officials about the shipbuilding program that Australia has adopted. But it is part of a larger plan. And what is that plan? Actually, from 2016, the Australian government decided first to come up with a Defence Strategic Guidance program. That Defence Strategic Guidance came through a white paper released by the current government. Concurrently, an integrated investment program was initiated, and that investment program is almost worth $200 billion spread over a decade or so. This investment program was followed by a defence industrial policy statement. Now, these are very distinct steps that Australia has taken. They involve deliberate decision making, deliberate change in direction of how the Australian armed forces interact with the Australian defence industry and how the Defence Science Technology Group, which is supposed to give inputs and develop the technologies for armed forces to make them future ready. So there is a complete synergy between the policy makers, the implementers, which is the defence industry and the Defence Science Technology Group, and of course the users, the armed forces. Since 2016, 4 steps have allowed Australia to begin a new journey in defence capability program. It began, as I said, with a strategic guidance in the form of a defence white paper released in 2016, followed by assessment criteria, which was then supported by an integrated investment program and a prioritization list. The prioritization list included the programs that will support the 3 armed forces, the Army, Navy and the Air Force. It included that the prioritization list was based on strategic criterion, which meant that Australia first assessed what are its threat perceptions, what are the threats going forward, and because of its geographical location, what it needs to build for itself to deter and defeat the adversaries. So in that, Australia identified that it needs submarines with long sea legs, it needs ships which are bigger, and also of course requires a lot of surveillance equipment, radars, and an air force which is ready to take on a sea-based threat that can actually threaten Australia. Given that these threats were assessed after a long deliberation, Australia has now embarked on in trying to design, develop and manufacture equipment meant for its armed forces. Almost similar to what India has now tried to do in its defence procurement policy, which is called the IDDM, which is the Indigenously Designed, Developed and Manufactured category for procurement and acquisition for Indian armed forces. What are those 10 programs that Australia is concentrating on? So these 10 programs, which are also called Sovereign Industrial Capability Priorities, are as follows. The Collins class submarine maintenance and technology upgrade, under which the submarine capability is integral to national sovereignty and the deterrence that Australia wants to have. Second is the continuous shipbuilding program, including rolling submarine acquisition. Now, we are aware that Australia has given the contract for building submarines to the naval group, formerly the DCNS group from France. This happened a couple of years ago, and just about a week ago, BAE Systems Australia has grabbed the contract to build frigates, the future frigates for the Australian Navy. So that's the second program. The third program for the Australian Armed Forces is the Land Combat Vehicle and Technology Upgrade. Many of the armored vehicles, the utility vehicles for the land forces, that is the army, are being upgraded and revolutionized through major procurements and upgrade to deliver advanced next generation combat vehicles. That's the third program. The fourth program is to have enhanced active and passive phased array radar capability. That is, as I mentioned, is meant for surveillance given Australia's geographical position. The fifth is combat clothing survivability and signature reduction technologies. The sixth, advanced signal processing capability in electronic warfare, cyber and information security. The seventh is surveillance and intelligence data collection, analysis, dissemination and complex system integration. Eighth, test, evolution, certification and system assurances. Ninth, munitions and small arms research, design, development and manufacture of kinetic weapons. And the final one is the aerospace platform deep maintenance. Although complex or specialized maintenance of Australian Defence Forces rotary and fixed wing, such as their F-35 Joint Strike Fighters and large remotely piloted vehicles in Australia are sourced from US, their maintenance will have to be done in Australia. And for that, capability development is the key. And that's where the government and the Defence Department have embarked on a very planned program over the next decade or so, where all these elements will be factored in, where the local industry will be roped in, along with the DST, the Defence Science and Technology Group, which will work very closely with the armed forces and develop and manufacture and sustain these technologies to make them self-sufficient and also have the capability in terms of the local presence in Australia, which means it gives the strategic autonomy that Australia wants to have over the next decade or so. That's why I said right at the beginning that I find this to be uncannily similar to what India is trying to do. Australia has done it very systematically. In India, we are doing it piecemeal, although the roadmap or the end result is exactly the same as India desires and what Australia is doing. So, what are the components that are required in this kind of a program? One, of course, that the existing industry or the industrial base in Australia needs to be strengthened. They need to be given assured orders over the next decade or so, but they also need to have the capability, these industries need to have the capability to absorb high technology or modern technology and future technology. For that, you need skilled workers, you need skilled engineers and technicians, and of course, an assurance from the armed forces that they will not only jointly develop the platforms, but also use them as they get inducted into the Australian Armed Forces. So it was a very educative kind of a tour that I had. I met government officials from, as I said, from the DST, the Defence Science and Technology Group, people who are in charge of procurement. I had a meeting with the Australian Naval Chief. The Navy Chief, in fact, talked about the continuous shipbuilding program and what are Australia's major tasks that the Australian Navy has, given that it is at the confluence of both Indian Ocean and Pacific, Indian Ocean on its west and Pacific on its east, apart from the Southern Ocean which is on its south. The Australian Navy has a big task to look after the security of its immediate neighborhood, the smaller Pacific Island nations, as well as its own security, given that it is based in between Indian Ocean on one side and the Pacific Ocean on the other. And of course, Australia is an important player in what is now beginning to emerge as a major, I would say, playground for big power rivalries and competition, and that is the Indo-Pacific. So given the geopolitical situation at the moment, Australia has identified some of the necessary capabilities that it needs in the coming decade, and has taken steps, very deliberate and very important steps, to enhance its defense preparedness and make it autonomous or make it indigenous, so that in the future it is not dependent too much on industries and technologies which have come from outside. In the next part, I will talk about Australia's foreign policy and its strategic intent as Australia prepares to play a larger role and also tries to increase its cooperation in all respects with India and other nations in the Indian Ocean. But for the moment, this is Nitin Gokhale signing off.